Inspired by the contributions of citizens during the Battle of New Orleans, author Sue Ingalls Finan is joining us on Big Blend Radio today on our Way Back When history show to talk about her debut novel, The Cards Don't Lie. It's a story of love, rebellion, intimacy, betrayal, and heroism in the face of terror and barbaric brutality, and it borrows from real-life accounts from women during the battle. This is incredible.
I like that.
We got a voodoo priestess, a Creole plantation owner, and we have a lady who knows how to leave her body. Like, this crazy cool.
Ooh.
I know. And we've got a prostitute that's very patriotic. And she dated a privateer. Apparently it's not a pirate, it's a privateer. We're going to find out. This is an amazing story and really delves into what women went through, but all kinds of stories about what people were going through at that time. It's published by She Writes Press, and again, it's called The Cards Don't Lie. It's available now through Amazon, all those great places. I encourage you to go to her website, SueInglesFinan.com. That's Finan. SueInglesFinan.com. We also have Mike Guardia. We call him Military Mike. Author Mike Guardia is sitting in. He's our military history expert for Big Blend Radio, and he's sitting in and co-hosting. So welcome, Sue. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Very excited. This is probably one of my favorite novels I have read in the past 5 years, I'm going to say. Really, honestly. One of my favorite, diehard favorite novels. There's we're about to pack up and go on the road, for 3 to 5 years. And we basically give things away. And we have a small storage unit that we keep, things that are really treasured in lives. And there's these boxes of books. And they're really treasured ones. Mike Guardia, welcome. Your books are all in there, of course.
Yes.
And your
you.
book is going in there too, Sue, because it's like one of these epic.
Good.
I'm just blown away about. I sat up and read, and also got intrigued to learn more about history than about New Orleans, what was happening in Louisiana. I didn't know about the Battle of New Orleans. You got me intrigued. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And it's not really covered in a lot of history books. They kind of skip from the Civil War the Revolution to the Civil War, and nothing happens in between, which is not true.
Right. That is so true.
It was great to find out all this information.
No, I have to say that I think back to history class, and I have to say you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Battle of 1812, even the War of 1812 is left out in schools a lot of times.
Commodore Perry.
Yeah, at least the schools I went to.
Yeah.
It's almost like your history is like, okay, Revolutionary War, and then Civil War.
Yeah, that's it. You don't.
Yeah.
Unless you go to New Orleans. If you go to New Orleans, it's pretty prevalent there. They do have a lot of information.
Mike, I know that you studied history and have degrees in this. Did you get to delve into the Battle of New Orleans? Did you find that kind of one of those hidden stories as well?
I did, and I really don't think it gets even half of the attention that it deserves. When I was teaching history myself down in Texas, I would actually make it a point to have a whole block of instruction on the War of 1812. And not only that, I would take some foam rubber dodgeballs and I would take classes outside to the courtyard, and I would have them reenact the Battle of New Orleans.
Really?
Focusing on how innovative Andrew Jackson was in placing his artillery throughout that battle.
Wow. I'm so excited too, because that was one thing too about Andrew Jackson. This was so fascinating. This battle comes in. So you've got the women's side, which these women are toughies, right? And all different. I didn't realize that, basically the plantation, the Creole plantation owner, how they're pretty la-di-da, man. they're like the queen, I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Catherine.
But they were
go ahead.
Oh, well, they were the wealthy ones, and they kind of ruled the roost, and justifiably so. They were la-di-da, and as far as Marguerite went, she was a good organizer, and she had to multitask and run the plantation, except for the actual farming, etc. But it was a fantastic lifestyle that they had, and they did offer their homes, knowing that the battle was about to start. They did offer their homes as places where the wounded could be cared for. Mm-hmm. So that was, but there just isn't that much information as to actually what they did and how they did it, et cetera. That took a lot of ingenuity, I guess, to discover what they did and how they went about doing it, because nobody wrote down any notes about it. Mm-hmm. Whereas Jackson, there's lots of information about him.
Well, that was what's so interesting about the relationship between Jackson and Catherine. She was a free woman of color, voodoo priestess, and really was like the midwife, and she ran the like she was the medical go-to for women across New Orleans, and she just was, at the same time she had like a really, you would think that, okay, the priestess side, almost like woo-woo, but she was a toughie. Like she held like a roost, and she was very visionary of what was going on, and very interesting about her relationship with Jackson, because they came calling for her, which wasn't really the norm. The doctor didn't even think that was the thing to do, right?
Right, but Jackson really did not trust the average doctor. I shouldn't say average doctor, but the educated doctor. He had been wounded in a battle previously where the doctors in a different state all wanted to amputate his arm. And he said, no, you're not going to do that. And sure enough, a month later, he was busy leading his men on the horse and with both arms attached. So this was not a far cry from reality here, where he wanted the common man, and I put Catherine in there because she was a noted healer, and that was pretty normal for a person living in New Orleans. Actually, almost 1/3 of the population were free people of color, and they all had good jobs, careers, if you will, and Catherine was one of them.
And there was also a little bit of racism going on in that time frame too, right?
Oh, sure. Yes, but it was it was different than like on the East Coast. New Orleans was different because it had been a French colony for so long, and then Spanish, and then back to France. And they just had a different approach of looking at things, such as having so many of their people being free people of color. So that was a fascinating aspect to look at in terms of history.
And at the same time now you've got, so Marguerite, and she's the Creole Plantation mistress owner, and you also connected with Catherine on regards to the birthing of her baby, and that's a whole story that I don't want to blow anything here. That's a dangerous thing about this. I don't want to, as I was talking to Nancy about your book, I'm like, I can't blow this. I can't blow this on the show. Yeah. But Millie, the prostitute, like, she was so cool. She reminds me of those women that there's famous women that served in the military way back when that made themselves into men, and she reminds me of those women. Did you draw inspiration from those women for her character?
Well, it was a number of things. I mean, everything from those women who, hid their true identities to do whatever. That wonderful series Turn, that was also inspirational. Even I think her name was Belle in Gone with the Wind.
Belle Watson.
Not to mention like who was that? Pretty Woman. Who wants to be a prostitute? Nobody. Nobody says I want to be a prostitute when I grow up.
No.
So. They have dreams and visions and everything like that. And Millie just popped up in my head, and I thought, yes, she, plus having the relationship with the pirate, that it just seemed perfect that she would want to help and at first be looked upon rather with askance a look, but she really had a dangerous job, which I don't want to give away, but.
Yeah. I know. give me the warnings. Give me the warnings. Don't say it, Lisa. But because I was telling Nancy about your book, and
I'm like, don't tell
she
me.
was like, you need to stop here. But she was like, this is like epic, like Gone with the Wind style book, and I think that's what really, there's a really good historical novel to me is like the most treasured thing ever. Michener's done it, you know, even like Wilbur Smith and you know, Caldwell and MMK. There's, you have that same feeling where as soon as you turn, you know, open the first page, you are you're in it. You're right in it, and you're involved, and you can smell the streets. You can, you know, just taste the food, hear the different, you know, dialects. I mean, that to me is absolutely amazing. I want to go to Mike here because you were talking about Andrew Jackson, and I had a whole other idea of Andrew Jackson until this book, and then I'm still like, I have questions about him. But Mike, part of when you say how he did the battle, how he really planned this out, isn't it kind of unique because he really brought everyone together to fight this Battle of New Orleans? Was he brought people out of state and also united people that never thought they were going to be united?
He really did. And, you know, that's really where he shines as a leader. You know, I mean, Jackson, he's a mixed bag, you know, especially when you look at his presidency and some of the darker aspects of his time as an administrator. But when you really get down to looking at Andrew Jackson as a military leader, you know, he had so much raw talent that he was able to bring out, and it was talent that got the job done. And when you look at the whole story arc of his life, he did this on what was essentially a minimalist amount of education. You know, here was a guy who, you know, even up into his 60s and 70s, was barely literate by today's standards, but you know, he had that gift of gab, and he had that God-given charisma along with some God-given organizational skills, and not only shocked a lot of people, but I think also to a great extent he surprised himself.
I want to ask you, Sue, what led you to this story? Was it the Jackson side of it? Was it the women? How did you get into the Battle of New Orleans? How did you find it, and why did you scratch that itch?
Well, I did teach American history, and I had traveled to New Orleans a number of times and was just enchanted with their cultural backgrounds, their joie de vivre, their different foods, everything. And so I started writing it for my students, actually, because I had written for my students previously, and was putting everything together. And then I ran out of students because I retired. So that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to write this for adults. And women's perspective to me was so important. You know, there are a lot of books about Andrew Jackson and the battle, but when going through, for instance, the Ursuline Convent and seeing the story that they told about how they nursed the wounded and had converted the convent /school into the hospital, that was just fascinating. And they really weren't given very much credit except inside their own halls. So that's how I began the story, and then things just evolved after a great deal of research.
Wow, it's amazing to me.
I think that the women's story is difficult to tell because we were kind of left out of history in a lot of aspects. And you know, when Gone with the Wind hit the screens, I think that's the first time where people started to look at women a little bit differently as to what they could accomplish during a war, or you know, how, I don't want to use the word devious, but I'm going to use it because it's like, okay, there's
crafty.
Yeah, crafty. More than one way to do something. If we can't do it this way, we're going to do it that way kind of aspect. And you know, and I think as you go back in history, now we start to look for now women who had something to do with a battle and did something besides nursing.
Yes.
Because we've always been on the lines as
the nurturers.
nurses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but now it's like having like another one that could, like Amelia Earhart being like a pilot and things like that. It's we have to remind ourselves that we are part of history and have done a lot.
Yes, yes, we can call it her story instead of always history. But history is usually written by the victors, and those have generally been considered just the males. No offense, Mike, but
I know. I'm like, Mike, how are you feeling today?
Hello.
None taken.
None taken. No, but I think that was part of the thing too. Do you think that Andrew Jackson, kind of like, there's that side where if you're going to do something absolutely unique and go way out of the normal zone of this is how we do things in the military to win a war, and Mike, this is who you focus on in your books, are these people that, look at Blackburn and Volkman. I mean, these guys, they all changed what happened in defense, in military tactics, right? So there's this other way of thinking. Do you think that Andrew Jackson went to women for help? Come on. And just kind of like glean from them? I bet you he did.
Well, yeah. Well, I actually think it was. I think it was a bit more pragmatic than that. I think Jackson, at his core, was an opportunist, and he saw people for what value they could provide to whatever operation he was doing, and he was pretty much of the mindset. And you'd be surprised. I mean, myself being a son of the South, a lot of Southerners, we adopt the attitude of we don't care who you are, we don't care what you look like, we don't care what gender you have, we don't care what name you call God. If you can get the job done, then you get her done. So we have that bit of a roughneck attitude. Yeah.
I see what you mean. And when you were doing your research, Sue, did you go to New Orleans and go to the museums and the historic sites like Jean Lafitte and in those different places to glean more information and get into your characters?
Several times, yes. And
I'm jealous.
And well, and they do have wonderful tours as well as museum exhibits. And Chalmette Battlefield, for instance, has an excellent movie in which they do not say a single thing about the women. What they do say at the end of the battle is that then the men were nursed. That was it.
Wow.
I pointed that out to the Rangers and said, hey, don't you think you should include some women in here? But anyways, there were fantastic tours, lots of good information, as well as lots of books written. And Jackson was very creative when he did the night battle, for instance. That was a first. The Redcoats certainly weren't expecting that at all. And
cool.
And there were a lot of course, there were, seeing as how we were outnumbered 2-1, there were a lot of mistakes that the British made, the Redcoats, which was another good reason that we won. But no, Jackson was definitely charismatic. He wanted everybody to help in the fight. Men and women, and all of the people were behind him completely when he came riding into New Orleans, even though he had severe dysentery, which must have been quite horrendous on horseback. But he asked for everybody's help. He needed it, and he got translators to be able to speak to all the people who had gathered for him, and they all, they knew they had to, otherwise the Redcoats would have taken over the entire territory of Louisiana, which was their aim, of course.
That, it was so interesting about how you did the battle scenes because, it's like you have to get through to people like me. That's why we have Mike here, because he helps me understand things. Because, I've asked Mike some questions. He's like, but it helps to understand how you described the battle blew my mind, literally. You could feel it. And understanding the role of the privateers, how they snuck in through the swamps and through the river areas, and how the British, like you said, they made some serious mistakes. It was, and they didn't expect that, but it was just, the why were they privateers versus pirates? They wanted to be, now that we're in the war part, what was that thing about them being privateers?
Well, that was they were considered privateers by one particular country, which is very little known. That enabled them to board other ships and take whatever they wanted. They didn't like being considered outlaws, although they were by certain people in New Orleans at the time. And yet the citizens themselves just absolutely loved them because they were able to procure items that were not that the citizens couldn't get any other way. And of course, he being Lafitte would not have been able to continue as a pirate had the redcoats taken over. So that was one of the reasons of his becoming a true American, you might say. But it was a fascinating lifestyle, I must say, and most of them gave up being a privateer or pirate or whatever you want to call it after the battle because they were released from whatever crimes they had committed, so called. And in fact, Jean Lafitte's half brother became a politician right after that.
That was interesting.
Oh, let me just not say anything.
I know, but also when you also look at what they were doing, but also the redcoats, right, which is the British. What I didn't realize, and Nancy's like, when I first started reading the book, I'm like, I didn't know they did that. And she's like, yes, this is how it happened all over too. It wasn't just here, or New Orleans. I didn't realize that people stole other soldiers from each other and put them on a boat while they were drunk. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I didn't know
that was a major cause of the war, and to be impressed. To get, they didn't call it Shanghaiing at that point, but basically that was it, just stealing other people and putting them on the boat, and, they're waking up and finding they're on the sea. So that was kind of interesting to look into that and write about it. And then, of course, the lifestyle of His Majesty's Navy as well as what it was to be a pirate and comparing those. That was kind of fun to look at and research.
How did you write?
Also,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I do have to say that when you're talking about the battles, etc., that my husband helped me a great deal on that.
Yeah, I heard that he's a history buff, right?
Fun.
So, yeah, because I was going to say the writing the battle scene to me was. I mean, I want to see this as a movie, a series, Netflix, whatever. I want people. Just everywhere you can get this story, you need to get it because it's amazing. And just reading it, you can understand it, and you're in it. And maybe it is because it's in a female perspective, you're in a different way. But you wrote a battle scene that continued on, and you were in it, and I could understand who was doing what. I could follow it, and a lot of times you can get lost with that kind of thing, when in a novel, So I was like, how is she doing this? So did you draw things out? Did you draw, like, sketches of how they were doing it, how they lined things up?
Oh, yeah, we had maps, and I did the initial research and then gave it to Jim, and then Jim would fill in a lot of blanks, such as an interesting way of how to light a cannon. I hadn't a clue. I mean, I had directions, but, he made it much more real, I think, or holding a musket in very, very damp weather with the gunpowder all around, et cetera. He really envisioned that far more than I did. And so between the two of us, that's how the battle scenes seemed to come much more alive. So that was a good thing. And if, by the way, as far as the movie goes, if you know Oprah, would you let her know?
I will. I'll tell her.
Movie, yeah.
I have connections. No, but I wanted to say
good.
This was part of it. When you were talking about cannons, it dawned on me like how many cannons we had seen through our park travels, and and you look at them and they've got the little wheels, and some of them are like really heavy, and some of them look like you can run with them, and some of them look like some of the old school firefighting equipment, right? And that's where, after we talked to Mike the last time he was on the show in October, he was talking about Crusader and General Don Starry and talking about tanks and how he got into the tank warfare. And I'm like, from reading your book and having just read Mike's, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. The canon started there. So, Mike, now do you understand where I was going? Like, did we start, the tanks come from these cannons? Because these cannons seem to be a changing thing in military history of ammunition and taking another side out. This seemed to be a huge part of that battle, is how the cannons were, how they were positioned, obviously who was, in what spot. But it seemed that the cannons played a major role, just like the tanks did for General Don Starry.
Oh, absolutely. They knowing which kind of ammunition to use and where to place it, and that's actually where Jean Lafitte's people came in very, very handy, because they were accustomed to doing that. Plus, they also had the ammunition, which was important for Jackson. Yes.
Mike, what do you think on the cannon side? Is that like is it as epic as the tanks changing over?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think I think when you take a look at the use of artillery at the Battle of New Orleans is where you really see Jackson's genius on display, because what he was doing essentially was something that was considered an aberration in the military history of the West. By instead of using his cannons strictly as an indirect fire asset, he was using them as a direct fire asset and placing them forward and in many places along the same lines as his advancing infantry. And this was something that I think had an incredible shock effect on the British Army, and in particular the British general Sir Pakenham, who really didn't he really didn't know how to process or comprehend what he was seeing. And you can almost imagine him, when you read the British accounts of the battle, you can almost imagine him being there saying, oh, blimey, those bloody Yanks have put their artillery forward. And, you have those, 8 and 10 pound guns who can cause an incredible amount of damage, taking out entire sections of the British line before the advancing infantry can even get there.
Wow. So did they do this thing, like, I always think of Santa Anna with this, like, here's your straight line of men that are just going to keep walking into fire, and it seems really dumb to me, because they're just walking.
Well, that's where you are now.
I know. Well, looking at history, I mean, it just seems really weird to just walk straight into a line of fire, like that big line, and a line after and a line after and a line after of people walking into gunfire, as opposed to let's duck and dive and hide behind a tree and snipe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, Mike. What happened? Where was that change? Where did that change up? Who stopped the big line thing?
Yeah, well, I think you see the first underpinnings of it happen during the French and Indian War, because the European school of warfare, and really if you take a look at wars stretching all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans, and you have the Greek hoplite phalanx, the rules of war were essentially a code of conduct that says, okay, whenever a nation goes to war, this is how gentlemen on the battlefield are supposed to conduct themselves. You're supposed to line up. You're supposed to see each other, and then you stop a few yards apart from each other, and then you take turns in volleys of fire, because because that's how gentlemen are supposed to do it. And you were actually considered a coward if you were standing on the front line and ducked to try to avoid an enemy bullet. But when you had the birth of the American colonies, and particularly when you had a lot of the hunters, trappers, and traders who made a name for themselves during the French and Indian War, somewhere at some point along the line, and I think I can reasonably credit Major Robert Rogers with this, someone finally stood up and said, you know what, if I use the terrain, and if I use cover and concealment, and if I use my tracking and hunting skills to my advantage so that I kill as much of the enemy as I can, and I still live to fight another day, that doesn't make me a coward. It makes me smart.
Yeah.
And it means at the end of the day, I'm going to be the winner.
Wow. But this is part of where goes in your book, Sue, when you talk about Andrew Jackson bringing all these people, the hundreds of trappers from Tennessee, Kentucky.
I vote for that.
The Indians were coming in, right? Isn't this exactly it?
Oh, absolutely. And the guerrilla warfare it worked, and that was important. So the Choctaw Indians coming in there, and they weren't detected by the redcoats, and the riflemen, they're great shooting, and that was another indication of how popular Jackson was, because these people volunteered to follow him, and they didn't have much support from their own militias. So
wow.
he used his ingenuity, and the redcoats were foiled.
Wow, check this out. You got everything in this. I mean, this battle was crazy because it also part of, like, here's New Orleans. You think about America becoming America in 1776, right? And now it's 1812. Everybody's kind of gone into this new kind of way of living, and so there was a pride. There was like, I don't want to lose my city. And I think that's also where the women came in, like, you ain't taking my plantation house or my midwife business. It ain't happening.
Yeah.
No.
Well, the redcoats had a horrible reputation, beauty and booty being the battle cry. And so the women were scared, and rightly so, because it would have been taken. I mean, they had already burned down Washington, D.C. They had attacked Baltimore. They had taken over several forts in the western part of the nation. So, yeah, they were scared, and they knew that they had to do something besides pray to Our Lady of Prompt Succor. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Cool. You think about what happens in war, and you think about England, you think of, the Queen and tea and lifting your pinky finger when you drink it. I can say that because I lived there, and I did high tea, and then I learned English tea, proper English tea, which is different than high tea. But it is just so different, and you think when people go to war, it's war, man. It's like when they say war is on, it's on, and this was just such a crazy time frame, and it just seemed also, and so am I right on this, that the 1812, didn't the battle end, but then New Orleans kept fighting longer than the Battle of 1812, like when everybody said, okay, we're done with this, New Orleans kept going? Didn't that keep going for a couple of weeks?
Yeah, the actual battle occurred on January 8th of 1815, and the treaty had been signed in Ghent. However, it hadn't been ratified yet, and by the time the information, it just hadn't reached New Orleans that everybody had agreed that the war should be over, but it still didn't need to be ratified, and that didn't happen for another month or so. So what would have happened if the redcoats had won? I don't know. I'm not sure, but they didn't, so they had to leave. That was a good thing.
And you told so many stories. I mean, Jackson, of course, is interesting, and he's a temperamental person, yet does his thing. And you think he unifies everyone, so everybody was, suspect about it in the beginning, like he's unifying people, right, in this one fight. And so I was like telling Nancy, like, dude, this guy's amazing. Look what he did. And she's like, no, I can't say the word she said about him, but I can't. And then I learned later, like, no, that's the reason. Like, he wasn't nice at the end. Like what he did with the Native Americans, after he got them all helping, he turned them around and like he wasn't nice in the end. So it's Mike, how do you balance that as a historian and an author too? Like, there's things that just like. Jackson was in, we think about it now. Do you think New Orleans would be New Orleans without Jackson? Do you think it would have been one? And then at the other side, look what he did to the Native Americans. How do you balance that out? You just go like, that's part of what happened at that point? How do you balance it out, like, emotionally? Because it is emotional.
Well,
it's like...
Yeah, and it's one of those weird things, and I think the best way that I've described a lot of these dichotomies is that, for every great person out there, for everyone who's accomplished something tremendous, you have to remember at the end of the day, they're human, they make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are really, really bad ones. And, no matter how strong the tendency is to want to put somebody on a pedestal, to want to idolize them, and to sometimes devolve into hero worship, you have to remember that we human beings and human nature being what it is, there's a dark side to every one of us. It's in some people it could be something as petty as, oh, well, I always forget to take out the trash, or, sometimes I forget to make my bed. But, then in other cases you have someone like Andrew Jackson, who, was this epic hero of the War of 1812, and yet he has no problem essentially committing genocide against a lot of the Native Americans. And I think the higher you rise in society, and the more you become a power player and a mover and a shaker, I think the gulf between what you do that's very good and what you do that's very bad tends to widen.
Wow. And there is something, I mean, we're looking now, this day and age, with our education and our, like, we have the internet, and we can talk to people on the phone, and we can email, and we can do all these things, and everything's moving faster. And we have access to a lot of things that they didn't have back then. So what they felt, thought, believed, depending on religion and everything else, what they believed back then and what we believe now is drastically different. So it's easy for us to sit in the seat now and go, "Well, man, really?" But what they felt and believed, we're evolving,
right?
I know I'm going to get emails. We're evolving just like animals evolve. But I'm just going to go there with it. It takes time. It's change and evolving and learning.
Sue, when you wrote this,
we hope we are anyway.
Yeah, right.
Evolving.
How did you handle writing this and all these characters and because what Mike said is dead on. Everybody has the good and bad, and some of your characters on the women, I was like, no way, man. I was like, no way. There were some parts in there I was like, dude, no way. Like, seriously. There were some things there was just things, and everybody has to read the book before I'm not going to spill it. I'll behave.
You don't want
I'll behave.
Spoiler alerts, yeah.
Yeah. How did you handle all that?
Somebody had told me a long time ago that when you're writing your characters, you should always make sure that they have flaws of some sort. And so with that in mind, I couldn't make anybody absolutely perfect, and I had to give some kinds of upheavals in each character's life to kind of think about, and for book discussion groups, for instance, to discuss. And so that's why I wrote in certain aspects of what you're referring to. Would you have done the same thing? I don't know. Would I have done the same? I don't know. There were decisions that had to be made, and the characters made them, and they're great for thinking about, talking about,
this
wondering
is book club territory,
material.
Man. Across the country, everybody needs this. Seriously, and I think it's really interesting right now. We're recording a show at the end of the month. We work a lot with Natchitoches up north, which is the oldest city in Louisiana. It's the very first territory. And they are part of this. They're doing this huge celebration. They're going to do it for 3 years because of the 300-year mark of the no man's land because of the Sabine River, going all the way up basically from Lake Charles up to Shreveport in Louisiana, and it's the no man's land. And there was a period of time where there was no law and order, so the privateers would bootleg through there. You could get away with anything at this point. So they're celebrating to mark 300 years, 3 years of shenanigans.
I just want to say it's like the beginning of the internet.
Yeah, reading your book, I was like, wow, this is all tied in, isn't it, in a way, right? John Lafitte went up there. Yeah. He went up the Sabine River, and I remember going on a boat. There's a place in Florian, Louisiana. It's off the Sabine River in Toledo Bend area, and there's this magical place called Hodges Gardens, and unfortunately it's closed. And it used to be a state park, and it was one of the most magical places we had been in the state. Basically this guy, Hodges, was this, multi-millionaire, and he was in oil and gas and everything, and he took a quarry that I think he created and redeveloped it into a botanical garden. And then it became a state park. Yeah, and he made a man-made lake where they drilled out everything. And he just, when he was older, he said,
what he did.
He covered up what he did, basically. Yeah, he said, like, this isn't, now I have a change of heart of this kind of thing, and then we're going to make this really nice. And this garden is incredible. And they have native plants, like they have a whole bog garden where you go in, you don't know if it's a snake or it's like a root of a plant, you don't know. But there's water moccasins out there, we know. We saw them, but it's closed. But when we were there, it was just, the park ranger took us out on a boat, and she was talking about how people were hiding things just in this kind of region. Like she would go, like at this point, they would hide through these woods. Where you're standing right now is where people hid stuff. And I was like, that is the coolest thing ever, man.
Yeah, you know? Fascinating. Yeah.
I know.
Well,
you
different lifestyles.
When you researched this, did you rely on anything on the internet, or did you find it bogus?
Oh no, there was some very good information on the internet, definitely, where people had done research and had very kindly put it up there for me to look at, and I did a lot of comparisons of what one person would say versus another's, and it's interesting. It's supposedly, so everybody thinks that theirs is completely factual, and yet the facts seem to differ. I can't call it fake news, but nonetheless. It was interesting to see that historians did differ in their approaches and what have you. So, you know, I took what I thought was either the most common or the most interesting or what have you, and put it all together.
Wow, and it's amazing. It is. I'm so thrilled you did it.
Well, thank you.
What was your decision to write? I know that you write in newspapers. You've written in all kinds of journals and all kinds of places. But what was it? And Sonoma, I saw that book too up on your website. Everyone, you got to go. SueIngalls.com. But what was it that you said that I'm going to do a novel? I'm going to do fiction.
I had started writing it for my students initially, and just as a story. And I also did a lot of plays for them. They love theater. I mean, you know, they love to get up on stage, and they think the costume is far more important than the dialogue. Oh well. Ooh. But I had written a lot of plays for them, like anything from the Salem witch trials to Bigfoot to Delaware Indians. To another one that was really good was about a child, an Amish child who had been murdered, and how the parents wouldn't testify. So it depended upon what they were studying, and but this came up, and again I had been to New Orleans several times, and that's how I began writing it. But then I ran out of students because I retired, so changed it to a novel for adults, a historical novel for adults.
I love this.
So, and I'm so glad you like it.
You have no idea how. I mean, I can't. I'm like, I've been waiting for this day for so long. You know, it wasn't that long ago that I read the book, but I mean, it's been. To me, it's just one of those books that should be. It needs to go to the Gone with the Wind epic. I'm not kidding. It is just so well written, and I think you really approach so many different things that people don't think about. I can't spill the beans. I don't want to touch it. I want to say everything. But you really touched on all kinds of issues that we're still fighting with today in America's history, all the way around. And so you really touched on that. And I think you also have it does show, even through Jackson, whatever he was, he still showed uniting for something you believe in, you know, and I think that was very interesting. It was interesting how he treated his men as well, how he went to the front lines, and I think you brought this piece of history alive that doesn't get shined on, and I'm excited because we're going to be going to New Orleans, obviously, and now I have this whole other mindset, and I'm like fascinating, and now I want to write a book on it. It's like crazy.
Oh, good.
You know, I get crazy with that. Well, but I find it interesting. You talk about doing plays, and Mike, that's what you were talking about. You, when you were teaching, you got them out to reenact the battle. So it seems that that's part of what we need to do, right? To get it in and under our skin, Mike, is to reenact it, right? I want to know what your students were thinking when you took them outside and made them do it. How did they feel? Did they enjoy it?
Oh man, they loved it. I was the only teacher in the school that did that, and it was a break from the normal, because I mean, when you go into a history class, you're thinking at most you might get a little bit of interactive storytelling, maybe some tactile pass around. The teacher might bring in some historical props, but to actually say, class, I want everyone to get out a sheet of paper. I want you to crumple it up. Everybody stand up. See this big little mesh bag of foam dodgeballs I have with me? Okay, well, everyone follow me outside. I lined them up into columns of American troops and British troops. I'm like, okay, you guys with the rolled up wads of paper, you're my infantrymen. You guys who have the dodgeball, you guys are going to be my artillery sections, and, I'm going to square you off against these authentic drill commands. I'm going to have you firing at each other. And, I have never had a class that did not get an ultimate kick out of that, it became something that spread across the school rather quickly, because then everyone wanted to go and see what Mr. G's class was doing.
Cool, Mr. G. We call you Military Mike, but now we might have to Mr. G. Mr. G in Oceanside, California made the best hamburgers. Anyway.
I just have to say that I remember hating history in high school. I hated it so much, and I had this teacher, Mr. Byrd, spelled B-Y-R-D, and as I walked into the class, and I had really good grades, and he goes, "Why do you hate history?" I'm like, "Because you never talk about anything relevant." And then he just sat me down. No, it was really funny. And he said, "Do you know what the pyramids are? They're in Africa." I'm like, I knew all about animals in Africa and the pyramids. I was like, I still don't care. And he changed my mind by, let me see you draw a pyramid. Tell me
you're an artist,
and let me see you make it come alive. Let me see you do something. He challenged me to the point of. And I'm like, "Can I please put animals in it?" He goes, "I don't care. I challenge you." And he changed my mind, but it was like two bulls duking it out.
Well, that's for me in history. I was like, when I went in high school and I graduated high school, I'd been to 16 schools. Now, Mike, you know about that being in the military, right? Moving.
I think it's a good thing.
But my schools were Kenya, South Africa, England, all these places. And it was when Nancy homeschooled me for a couple years on the road. She did a tour for the Cancer Association with her art. But we went to all these historic sites, all the national parks, and now look at us today doing that still, and going to these battle sites. And that's what got me into history. All of a sudden, I walked into school, and my top thing was history because of going to Ishlawanda Rock. It was still where Shaka Zulu fought against the British. Again, sorry, Glenn, our friend over in Norfolk Tours, our English historian. But there was this fight. And to understand and then see these mass graves changed my life of understanding what it was. And then being in the midst of a war was not easy either. But being in those places, and I think when a book can sweep you away and get you to understand and get you to get that place, we understand life so much more. So, Sue, I thank you. And before you go, are you ready to play our time machine game?
Oh, I guess so.
I know. We don't tell people about this. So what happens is we put you in a time machine, and Mike, you're getting it next.
Yeah.
You're going to get it on your segment after this. But we put you in a time machine, and you get to get out wherever you want, in the future, in the past. We want to know where you're getting out and when and why. Who do you want to meet? Do you want to be part of that battle? Do you want to meet Andrew Jackson, maybe Catherine? Who do you want to meet? So here it is. We're putting you in the time machine. I know. We're so nice. We're taking off. Sue, where are we getting out?
Yes.
It's a little tight in this time machine. It's like a phone booth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wow. I think it would be interesting to alight into the battle and find out, meet the women who were so responsible for helping out Jackson. I'm not sure I would like the toiletry portion of it,
no,
or the illnesses, or the wounds, or what have you. Wow, that's very interesting. It kind of reminds me of that round table that some artist did with all the women around it, and who would you invite if you could? Who would you talk to? You know, living and dead. That would be a fascinating thing to talk about too. But on the other hand, I kind of wish that I had been born 50 years later, because of all the things that women are able to do now. And I just, you know, I am so enamored with the respect and the trust that a lot of our leaders, our female leaders, are showing, and I hope that they're successful. And if they all read my book, it's a great American read. I think that would be great.
You go, girl. Sell it. Sell it.
Yeah. And you know, we need more trust. We need more respect. We need more sisterhood and brotherhood. And I'm hoping that that's all going to happen in our future. So
I think so. I think so. I think you have to have a bump in the road to toss the apple cart around a bit.
Well, you
and you can choose where you put those apples. We're going to play a special song for you. It's from New Orleans, from our friends John Wanager and the Good for Nothing Band. It's called Crystal Ball because we had to. This is for Catherine, your character. I had to play this. And everyone, you can go to thegoodfornothingband.com and keep up with them. They play all around New Orleans all year round. And, of course, New Orleans, that's all you get. Not all you get. You get good food, too. You get a lot of music all year round, and that's one of the best things about New Orleans. So here it is, Crystal Ball. But everyone, again, you can go to Sue's website. Go get the book. The cards don't lie. They don't. Check it out. Get it on Amazon. Go get it anywhere you can in bookstores. Go to her website, SueInglesFinan.com. And, yes, she is related to Laura Ingalls Wilder. And I'm just, like, amazed because I grew up on those books in the middle of Kenya, and, you know, on the equator, listening and reading these and going, oh, my gosh, I was enamored with that. So and I'm enamored by your book now, and just all the best. And please write another book, okay?
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. And thank you, Nancy and Mike. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. Happy holidays to you, too. Everyone, thank you to FamilyHistoryExpos.com for sponsoring today's show and this segment. Here it is, Crystal Ball. And then stay tuned. We're going to be chatting with Military Mike, or Mr. G, about how he does these plays in his classroom. Stay tuned.
I love it.
Them shoes, whoa, and all that thing that's sticking to your birthday suit, whoa, with all that graffiti up on your wall, you might be mistaken for a voodoo doll. My little bourbon, kick off the terracotta turban, make a little magic in the bathroom stall, have ourselves a crystal ball. You sure as hell, baby, you put a spell on me, but then I've always been a sucker for a cartoon tapestry. I imagine you sit here on my lap, studying your 38 geek cup, not my little bourbon, kick off the terracotta tabby, make a little magic in the bathroom stall, have ourselves a crystal ball. Oh, I can tell from across the alley, you were the tree. Burning for the meat of my knees, floating all around in your barefoot vagabond breeze. And I know it ain't the W, but after all, I'm begging not a juice. It is the order to call. Let's slip into the bathroom, have ourselves a crystal ball. Yeah, imagine you sitting here on my lap, studying your 38 deep cup, not my little bourbon. Kick off your tarot card turban, make a little